Well, it was a storm for the record book. Superstorm Sandy, its powerful wallop devastating parts of the East Coast, and it may have been just a Category 1 hurricane, right? Just a Category 1. But remember this warning from our very own Janice Dean?
Million people could be affected by this storm. So people are like, oh, it's a northeast storm. It's only a Category 1. What's the big deal? No, this is an impressive storm, and it's not just a tropical system. As Jenna mentioned, we've got basically a hurricane inside a giant nor'easter, already for the record books, the lowest pressure on record at this latitude. So that is impressive. And what pressure means, the lower it goes, the stronger the storm that we are dealing with.
I don't know if you remember this, but at that time when Janice was giving us that forecast, it was going back and forth. Is it a hurricane? Is it not a hurricane? Is it a hurricane? Well, now the National Hurricane Center is taking a lot of heat because it didn't issue hurricane watches and warnings. So the center has proposed some changes to its criteria for storm warnings for everybody because of this one storm on the East Coast. What does this all mean, really? Janice Dean is here. Hopefully you could explain it to us, JD, because what was going on behind the scenes about whether this storm was a hurricane, wasn't?
Right.
What was going on?
Well, the bottom line is this was a storm that impacted millions of people with 90-mile-per-hour winds once it made landfall. It had a storm surge of 10 feet, and we had 20-foot waves in New York Harbor. Okay, so what was happening was behind the scenes, the National Hurricane Center said, well, because this storm is transitioning, it's not a full tropical storm. Remember, we were talking about the nor'easter with the hurricane inside of it. Right. It was making a transition from a warm core low to a cold core low. So it was interacting with a cold Canadian storm, and it was becoming that superstorm, a very, very rare meteorological event. This is historic. We've never had something like this making landfall. So the National Hurricane Center was saying, well, scientifically, it's not a hurricane, so we can't, in good faith, issue hurricane watches and warnings.
So let me stop you there, because you're one weather forecaster, the best weather forecaster, by the way, in the entire country. Of course, I am a little biased, but let's just say that there's thousands, though, of weather forecasters up and along the East Coast that were getting these messages every, half an hour from the National Hurricane Center. And what were they getting into their newsroom, and how did that impact their telling of the story?
Well, what happened was the National Hurricane Center decided that once the storm moved north of North Carolina, it was up to the local offices across the Northeast to really take over with the storm advisories. And because they were saying it was going to be a transitioning storm, a cold transitioning into a cold core low, that it was up to the local forecasters to issue their own warnings. But they couldn't issue hurricane watches and warnings because
why not?
Because the National Hurricane Center are the only ones that can issue the hurricane watches and warnings. So the Northeast was issuing gale warnings and flood warnings and high wind warnings, something you would typically see with a nor'easter, but this was unprecedented. So they did that, and as the storm was making landfall with 90-mile-per-hour winds, 10-foot storm surge, we were jumping up and down going, why aren't you saying there needs to be hurricane watches and warnings? And from my perspective, from a lot of meteorologists' perspective, maybe people would have heeded more warnings
because
if the watch when you mentally think to yourself, a hurricane watch, hurricane warning, a hurricane is coming.
So what's the change now? What's changed?
What they're thinking about doing, they haven't implemented this yet. They are saying that the National Hurricane Center can perhaps now incorporate not only tropical storms, but transitioning storms and post-tropical storms. So storms making that transition to a nor'easter type storm. So they will still be able to issue hurricane watches and warnings, even if scientifically it's not a hurricane. And Jenna, I think mixed messages might have been the problem here with Mayor Bloomberg. 2 days before this storm hit, 2 days, and it was still technically a hurricane, he was saying, it's not going to be that bad. It's not going to be as bad as Irene. I think we have a clip from Mayor Bloomberg.
We are not ordering any evacuations as of this time for any parts of the city. We're making that decision based on the nature of this storm. Although we're expecting a large surge of water, it is not expected to be a tropical storm or hurricane-type surge. With this storm, we'll likely see a slow pileup of water rather than a sudden surge, which is what you would expect from a hurricane and which we saw with Irene 14 months ago. So it will be less dangerous, but make no mistake about it, there will be a lot of water, and low-lying areas will experience flooding.
But what was he supposed to do there? If the National Hurricane Center was saying it's not a hurricane, then what would anyone do?
I know. as meteorologists, we were pulling our hair out, going, we have been saying for a week that this was going to be an epic storm. So I don't know what information he was going with, but I'm just going to say the fact that there were no hurricane watches and warnings may have played into him downplaying it. Now, later on, he started to say, okay, this is a serious situation, but that was 2 days before this storm hit. We were saying a week before that this was going to be a big deal.
Well, it's interesting to see how one event may change the entire system. So we'll continue to watch that because it affects all storms, wherever they are in the country.
We learned from our mistakes and the hard way at some point.
Janice, thank you.
You're welcome.
We appreciate that. John?
Bloomberg, the guy who set up those information terminals, he can't have a hotline to Janice Dean's place? I mean, come on, let's get him a red phone.
I'm in. Do it.
Okay.
Let's do it.
You can take those 3 a.m. phone calls from the mayor of New York.